First, I should disclose for anybody that came to this session thinking the entire conversation is going to be about TikTok. It's not. It's going to be about all kinds of platforms, and what we're going to be talking today about is propaganda and the way that digital media has sent propaganda into hyperdrive. So, as everybody knows, when there is war, there is propaganda. This is not new. This has gone on for millennia. So it's really no surprise that when it comes to the war, both Russia and Ukraine are using everything they can to win hearts and minds. This is the case in every conflict. But what has changed, of course, is both the style and particularly the speed of those messages, and the ability for everyone, from eyewitnesses to digital forensic analysts, to both verify and debunk information, and also the struggle for social media to play whack-a-mole in terms of figure out what to leave up and what to take down. This, of course, is playing out very differently in Russia than it is in Ukraine. Sorry, I'm of a certain age, so I still have to stop myself from saying the Ukraine. In Russia, the Iron Curtain, of course, has descended on the news media. I lived in Moscow for 5 years in the 80s, and even then, at the height of the Cold War, there was not this kind of lid on independent journalism and Western media. This is unprecedented. But thanks to VPNs and also the fact that some content is still able to slip through, the truth is getting into Russia for those who care to hear it. Ukraine seems to be holding its own both on the ground and certainly in the way it's messaging the horrors of the war and the righteousness of their own cause. If you haven't seen it, just take a look across the street at what used to be in previous years Russia House here on the promenade. It is now Russian War Crimes House, which basically is like a meme come to life. So the Ukrainians are really brilliant at this kind of thing. But still, the war is far, far from over, and we have two brilliant panelists who are going to talk about where we are, how this is playing out, and what might be next. Over here, the lovely lady with the belly, which is a baby, by the way, is Nabiha Syed. She is the CEO of the Markup, which you are not a subscriber and an adherent to reading it religiously. You should be. It is an investigative journalism outlet that explores how powerful actors use technology to reshape society. Nabiha was previously the vice president and associate general counsel at BuzzFeed. Basically, she was the newsroom lawyer, which back when BuzzFeed was in its journalism heyday, where it is now as a subject for another session. Before BuzzFeed, Nabiha was an associate at a leading media law firm and a First Amendment fellow at the New York Times. And what you mostly need to know about Nabiha is she is look up on Wikipedia or edit Wikipedia the term badass, and there she is. Immediately to my left is a new friend, Salvatore Romano. He is a social psychologist working on algorithmic accountability. He's the head of research at Tracking Exposed, where he combines qualitative and quantitative analysis to assess the impact of social media's algorithms on society. He works at the intersection of media campaigns, academic publications, and technical reporting for legal proceedings. So, Sal, we're going to begin with you because you've been doing a lot of research, particularly on what's going on with Russia. But we're just going to start with sort of the current moment in time, and to give us an overview of how Ukraine and the Russian government are using social media and other forms of digital media to both inform and or mislead the public.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Everything started on 4th of March when basically the Kremlin promulgated the fake news law that could sentence till 20 years of jail for Russian not following the point of view of the Kremlin on the war. And after this law, all the platforms somehow react to basically keep safe their users and their employers, and basically at the beginning of the war, we saw this claim of Putin losing the TikTok war and in general the social media war because the massive amount of content against the war was flooding like all the social media, and somehow this fake news law was also a reaction to this propaganda battle that was going on. After the ban, most of the social media we know, like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, were banned completely in Russia. And just two main platforms remain available for the Russian users, which are YouTube and TikTok. Interestingly, YouTube somehow was too big to be banned. So Russia declared they want to ban YouTube, but in the end they didn't, because actually it was really essential part of their state infrastructure. On TikTok we saw something different, because on the 6th of March, basically the platform tried to apply the fake news law, and they decided basically to stop new content upload for all the users in Russia. And with a much less clear announcement, they also decide to ban all the content not posted with a Russian IP for all the Russian users. So this was something unprecedented. We measured that like 95% of the content available on the platform were banned. This leads to some interesting and funny facts, like the TikTok account itself has been banned in Russia. So if you access TikTok, you will see a sentence saying that the channel didn't post any video yet, which is hilarious, but this is just an example to show how big was this act of censorship. And we also know that somehow the state used a coordinated campaign to somehow avoid this restriction and let influencer pro-Kremlin post content on TikTok, even if there was this upload ban. And so we saw basically a state promoted act of circumventing the restriction using a loophole, a technical workaround to basically continue posting this content on the platform.
I just want to stop you for 1 second, just to clarify, to make sure that I and everybody else understand. So TikTok was allowing, not by policy, but in reality, was allowing Russian propaganda, pro-Kremlin content to continue to exist, to be distributed in Russia, despite the fact that their policy statement said that they would not.
Exactly. Between the 6th of March and the 26th of March, basically new content should be banned, but we saw a coordinated campaign of influencers, and we know that they were directly paid by the state to promote a certain type of message, and basically to keep posting content pro-war on TikTok. I just want to say that Russia is not the only one the only country who tried to somehow influence the debate thanks to influencer. Also, the U.S. And President Biden made a call with the most influential TikTokers to somehow explaining them how to promote the state point of view on the war, and also the EU.
The U.S. position on the war.
Yeah,
but was that content getting through to Russians?
This content was not getting to Russian because and this is the interesting part. We saw like a split between what is seen from Russia and what is seen from the rest of the world.
Right. So on TikTok, what Russians are seeing on TikTok inside Russia is pro-Kremlin propaganda and other completely non-political content, but nothing that might debunk a lot of the lies that are coming out of the Kremlin.
Yeah, exactly. For example, now on the Russian TikTok, we don't have any information about the Bucha massacre or all the things that happened after March
Yeah.
and all the atrocities.
And how much do you think is this, is this how much are the strings being pulled? I mean, this is maybe a leading question from Beijing. It certainly doesn't seem a coincidence that this is that Beijing would allow this, considering they certainly wouldn't want the same thing to happen in their own country.
Yeah, that's particularly interesting because, as we know, TikTok is a Chinese state company, and we have evidence that on Douyin, the Chinese version of the app, anti-war content were banned as well. In the beginning of the war, these let's say this pact between Russia and China wasn't clear, yeah. But we saw something going on their social media, and we could somehow make an hypothesis going in this direction.
Yeah, great. Okay, I want to come back to you, and we have more questions for you, but I want to turn it to you, Nabiha. Let's talk about not just TikTok, but of course, there are a number of very influential platforms around the world. We know that TikTok and YouTube continue to operate in Russia, but all of the other platforms, of course, are operating around the world, and people are uploading all kinds of stuff, real or not. Talk a little bit about how you think the platforms are responding in terms of how they're approaching information or propaganda about the war, either pro-Kremlin or pro-democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not the first time that these platforms have confronted misinformation. And so there is a playbook. And often that playbook, as one of its first ports of call, will say, we're going to inform the users, right? Rather than banning, we're going to just label things for you. And so you see that on Twitter, on YouTube, and interestingly, for I think one of the first times, if not the first time, also on TikTok, saying we're going to label state-sponsored media. We're going to label RT and Sputnik in the countries where that's available. Now, for TikTok, they banned that in the EU. But elsewhere, if you're sitting in the States, as I often am, though not today, obviously, you'll see a label and sort of pushes the onus on you. There's also part of the playbook is saying, well, media literacy is the answer. We're going to go click over here, read the part of the website that no one cares about, and learn how to educate yourself on what is misinformation and disinformation. Now, if people actually did that, we'd live in a very different world, but that is part of the playbook that you see on every single platform. There's also a commitment to hiring more content moderators, more human resources, recognizing that algorithmically tracking misinformation is quite challenging. But again, I mean, as the Wall Street Journal reported for TikTok, the human content moderators were given very broad, very, very broad guidelines on what counted as misinformation or conspiracy. And so depending on who you got, something might be taken down or not. And that sort of unevenness in enforcement is something we see in all kinds of platforms, especially in image-based platforms, right? Because images can mean a variety of things, and they don't often translate across cultures. What might look like it's a photo from war could be a historical photo of something of great significance. And so it's really tough to have human beings do that. So these sort of strategies of, well, we'll teach you how to be better about what you're seeing, and then we'll tell these people who are underpaid, sitting in a different cultural, political context, how to identify what is and is not problematic. It's a common playbook, but it's not always the most effective. With TikTok in particular, I think there's a really interesting design challenge too. We don't fully know how the TikTok algorithm works, but what the company has said is it factors into account the number of times you watch a video to feed you more videos that look like what you just saw. So imagine you see a video and you're like, is this real? I can't tell. Let me play it again and again. And again, and you've now told the algorithm that what you want to see is exactly that. So even if you watch it 5 times and you conclude it's fake, the algorithm is taking that feedback and saying you want more of this, right? So the design of the algorithm is creating a situation in which you might not be able to escape that loop, even if you want.
But that's the case with that algorithms across all the platforms operate that same way. More of what we think you want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so for algorithms like the newsfeed on Facebook, for example, or other platforms that factor in your friends, your social networks, your circles, there's at least that counterweight with TikTok's experts believe, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, that those weigh in less than actually the number of times you've watched something. And so it really sort of pokes a finger in the eye of educate yourself, watch it again, interrogate it. You really can't do that in a meaningful way. And so, that's part of the playbook. There's other things that can be done, right? So I think it's very common to say, well, what can you do? This is just algorithmic governance. It's too hard. But I think there are other interventions that could be helpful for researchers, like could you put dates on the videos so you could easily see, is this an old thing that's being recirculated? We see that with Ukraine, where videos from Chechnya, from Syria, from Lebanon have different audio layered on top of it and are hashtagged Ukraine. And the reason for that isn't always, like state-sponsored nefarious activity. It's also content creators who are saying, well, then I'll get more engagement on my page and I might get follows and then I'll have a live stream and people might donate money to me. It's a scam, but it's not a state-sponsored scam. It's an opportunistic scam.
Right. Of course, one of the exciting things that we've seen, and this is not new, this goes back, maybe a decade to the Arab Spring, is a whole class of digital forensic analysts like Bellingcat at the Atlantic Council and at a lot of news organizations.
Yep.
Who are analyzing these and able to painstakingly match photographs from other visual satellite images, looking at the metadata, looking at, and of course, eyewitnesses on the ground. How much impact are those kind of, and you're engaged with this work as well. How effective is that? And
it mostly depends on the platform and on the attention that the user want to give to content. We know that, for example, TikTok is a super quick platform, and it's really fast in suggesting you new content, and the content are short, even if they are longer and longer every year. So we see that the attention span that user can give to this content is lower and lower, and also the how fast is the platform generates somehow a difficult challenge on checking and coding, let's say, this type of content. And obviously, it's a challenge that we need to address for the future, because we see a trend on platform. We see that they are faster and faster. So we also need to create new strategies that can be as fast as this platform, and that these techniques should be able to inform user immediately and not
right.
After a video went viral and billions of people watching it, because otherwise it's too late, basically.
Right. You're sorry, you were going to continue?
No.
Oh, yeah. So you were talking a little bit about, Nabiha, the challenges around the algorithm, the unintended consequences, I'll put it kindly, of the algorithm feeding us content that maybe is not exactly what we want. But let's talk about sort of content moderation policy for a second. We've seen the platforms, since the beginning of the war, to sort of struggle for what their policy should be. That there's been a policy at a lot of platforms that, people wishing harm or death to someone should not be allowed, and they banned it in the case of Russia and Ukraine. Then it was like, well, wait a minute, if you want a Russian soldier to be dead, that's okay. It got into some very weird, ethically murky territory. How do you see that playing out? And do you feel like, from where I'm sitting, it feels like content moderation policies are being made up as they go along and very much reactive to public sentiment? What do you see?
It's such a recipe for inconsistency, because human life is inconsistent, right? I think that's what's so hard when we demand perfection from platforms of this size, is that the human experience is varied. There are certain things that platforms have been able to coalesce around, like child sexual abuse content. Okay, we know what that is. We can agree universally that that's bad. And you see platforms actually being quite aggressive and, I would say, successful in taking down that kind of content. When it comes to politics, right, one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. These definitional questions are really hard. And I keep coming back to Mike Masnick of Techter has the Masnick impossibility theorem that says content moderation at scale is effectively impossible. Right? It's effectively impossible to do that successfully because these problems are just so big. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do nothing, right? That doesn't mean that it's like, well, it's too big, we're going to sit over here. And you do hear that sometimes from people who are reacting to platform critiques. To me, what this requires is real parity for researchers, regulators, journalists to be understanding what's happening on these platforms in real time, to interrogate it, right? To say, you made this set of choices, and you continue to make this set of choices, and we want to hold you account. Right? Like that power balance that you're making a choice, we don't expect it to be perfect, but we expect you to be accountable. That is the balance of power we expect from governments, from big companies, from everyone else. But because of the algorithmic nature of these platforms, we don't have that balancing power yet. And I think we're in a really interesting moment to develop that, and I know we're not talking about regulation yet, but we can soon, about how we create that balance of power. Because otherwise, all we know are these sort of momentary inconsistencies where we're like, well, you didn't ban that, but you did this. What are we doing here? Without any way of knowing whether that's a pattern or whether those are anecdotes.
Right. Well,
yeah, if I just can iterate on this. What we do as a non-for-profit organization is basically this. We try to keep platform accountable. The key word here is transparency. Transparency on policy and transparency on data, and actually the possibility to analyze this platform. For example, TikTok is one of the last platform that came out, and it's the less accountable because they don't provide any type of public API or public data to make this investigation. So we needed to build our tool to collect this content independently. Otherwise, it would be impossible to make them accountable. And also the policy, we saw that the policy that TikTok did were somehow inconsistent. They decided to ban new content on 6th of March, but they needed 20 days to actually implement this ban. And during these 20 days, this TikTok is just an example of something going on all the platforms. In these 20 days, some malicious actors were able to exploit this bug somehow, and this opacity that was built around their new policy. And this is things that we need to require to platforms.
20 days is an eternity. I mean, especially at the beginning of a kinetic war.
Yep.
So both the Markup and your organization are, of course, at the forefront of demanding this kind of transparency. What kind of likelihood? I know there has been in the United States. Europe is much more sort of progressive when it comes to regulation. There's some small inklings of legislation around sort of providing more anonymized data from the platforms to researchers. Do you see any promise or hope in that? This is your invitation to talk about regulation, Nabiha.
Promise I won't bore you. I think we are at a real pivotal point for having more information from the platforms. And I'll take the EU and the US in sort of that order. I mean, the challenge with getting more data from the platforms is that you have to balance transparency with user privacy, which of course is also a very valuable principle, especially as we sit here in Europe. And this is different than if you think about the broadcasters of 100 years ago or 75 years ago. Here, if you're thinking about the BBC and what the BBC would put out there, you know that they're there to inform the public. Therefore, you can hold them accountable for the messages they put out. When you're talking about social platforms, people are posting things for all kinds of reasons. An articulation of their own identity, something they want to share with their friends, a joke, a scam, also maybe state-sponsored influencer content. It's varied. And so you really need to balance what's the individual's sort of interest in this with the public's interest in interrogating the platforms because they are shaping public discourse and conflict. And so in the EU, we just saw an agreement on the Digital Services Act, specifically Article 31, that does say for systemic risks, like misinformation propaganda, platforms have a set of obligations. They need to be doing algorithmic audits, so they need to be checking their own algorithms about how they might design or create a hospitable environment for systemic risks like misinformation. They also need to provide access for public interest researchers and regulators. Now, like with many things, these are broad principles, so we'll see how it plays out. But this agreement was just reached. It'll be going to the member states for approval. After it's approved, it goes into effect. The platforms have 15 months to respond and redesign. And so we're looking at early 2024, maybe at Davos in 2024, we can understand what those enforcement mechanisms look like. This has been a hard-fought fight for public interest research. Now, the key is not only disclosure of information, it's also decision-making. Who is deciding what information to disclose? If you leave it to the platforms, well, there's some incentive questions there, right, about what they're going to do. And so without saying too much, people should stay tuned for a report that'll be released in the next couple of weeks.
Ooh.
I know. I was hoping it'd be out by this panel, but it's not. From an interesting EU body that is basically looking at, okay, we may have this data, but who's going to decide whether this is sufficient? And who's going to decide what the standards are for public interest researchers?
And who is?
Well, they're creating there's a proposal for the creation of a governing body that will do exactly that. And for those of you who've been in academia or otherwise did academic research or scientific research, you may be familiar with the concept of an IRB, an institutional review board, right? A board that says, well, if you want to experiment on human subjects, here's what an ethical review looks like, here's what the standards are, here's how much information you have to disclose, here's your intent, here's what you're doing to protect privacy. That doesn't happen at a high level, it happens on an individualized research level. And so there is a proposal, the details of which will come out in the next couple of weeks, that's proposing something just like that for public interest research. And that's really, really exciting and has been the result of years of work.
Yeah.
The US is nowhere near as far.
Yeah. What are you saying?
Yeah, we are also trying to collaborate with EU Commission and other partners and researchers on disinformation related to the war. For example, the EU put in place a ban on RT, Russian Today, and Sputnik that is currently on in Europe. And for example, on this type of ban, it's interesting to see how the definition of, for example, European citizen, where this law applies, is defined by the platform itself. So, for example, your AP, your provider, will tell the platform your origin and, in theory, your nationality and the law that apply to you. But this type of application of laws, it's somehow dangerous because we are delegating the platform to decide what is an European in the digital world. For example, on TikTok, we saw that most of the providers and the European IP will see the ban on Sputnik and Russia Today, but there are some providers, a small minority, that do not somehow that are not considered to be European, and so to this provider. Some of these laws are not applied, and this is an example of accountability and accountability to a granular level, and also an example of where somehow the institution should somehow take in first person, like the chance to go on the platform and understand what's going on there.
Yeah, I'd like to believe that, that with such a clear-cut case of sort of good versus evil, when we're talking about the invasion of a sovereign nation, a sovereign democracy, for no reason, that maybe that is the prompt, maybe that is the inspiration, the horrific inspiration needed to see some of these changes. We're going to go to your questions in a second, so get ready, and there will be mics. But I want to bring it back to the details of the war again. We started talking about what kind of information people are receiving in Russia, what needs to happen in order to sort of improve what the platforms are doing and seeing and how we know about it. Let's bring it back to the ground before we go to questions one more time and talk about what Ukraine is doing. We talked a little bit about Russia and their ban on a free press. I'd like to hear both your impressions of how you see the Zelensky government and Ukraine and how you see they're using digital and social media for their own aims. It's been quite interesting.
Yeah, So basically, Ukrainians do not have the power to. They don't own platforms. They don't own social media, and so more than put restriction on social media, they super effectively use their communication strategies more than censorship. And we see that when you have like the vast majority of users on your side, then it's almost impossible to contain this explosion of content. And so I would say that what the Ukrainian did really well is the communication strategy, and they were allowed to spread their communication on several social media, and they received the help from users. Obviously, they are not able to go, for example, on Russian-owned company like VK and so on, where in this environment the content is completely controlled by the state. But at least in Ukraine and in, let's say, Western countries, their messages are super effectively spread.
Yeah, I mean, that says it all, but really, like, it's the most effective humanizing campaign of a war that I think many of us have ever seen. It's not as if the last 20 years have not been pockmarked by war across the world. I mean, we've seen so much devastating conflict, but you see it from the vantage point of, here's a drone strike, here's a camera from far away, here's occasional deeply moving written pieces. But what TikTok provides, right, what you see on these platforms, what Ukrainian people have given is here's what it looks like to be in your bomb shelter, in your basement. Yeah. Here's what it looks like from our own eyes to hear this. And there's something about that is, I mean, humanizes the conflict and builds, I'm sure internally builds quite a lot of morale, externally builds a narrative of these are crimes that are happening and something needs to be done about it. I mean, they are in the attention economy that we're all in, participating in it in the most effective way because it is human to human, right? And it's not broadcast to broadcast. And that's an amazing development and an effective one.
Right, and not to mention a brilliant, charismatic communicator in the form of President Zelensky, who knows how to deliver his lines.
Oh, yeah.
And he's doing it very effectively. Okay, we want to take your questions. Yes, right here in the front. Please wait for the mic so that people who are watching us on streaming can hear you.
Hi.
And please say your name and your affiliation.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much, guys. Really interesting panel. Probably the best one I've been to since I've been in Davos, and I found it really, really interesting. I'm CJ. I'm the co-founder of Atlantis World, where we're building the Web3 social metaverse. And beyond that, I'm also building a charitable foundation for humanitarian aid in Ukraine. I noticed that you said some Russian media organizations had been banned in Europe. For example, RT and Sputnik, I believe. I'm curious what you guys think about that, and if you think it's ethical or justified, or it should be like that. It doesn't make sense to me that different governments globally will continually silo the flow of information. If it's wrong that Russia will ban European media, is it right that Europe will ban Russian media?
It's a great question. Yeah.
I can say, first of all, that Russia Today and Sputnik are banned as entity because they are Russian state media, let's say. They have been founded billions from the Russian state, so it's not banning all the content containing a specific message, but it's more about banning some specific entities. And for example, some of the main journalists of these channels were also affected by sanction even before the Sputnik and Russia Today ban. In general, it's a really good question, and what I can say more than answer directly to the question is what we are seeing is an increasingly split, an increased splinternet, somehow a division between different sides of the world. And this wall that we are altogether somehow building between us and Russia, or China and us, and so on, will change dramatically the way we think social media. Maybe it was a naive idea to think that social media are global, and that this platform will increase their amount of user all around the world. We are now seeing that this idea is not true anymore. We see that social media are somehow related to the nation that own them, and in a more polarized way, in a more polarized world, also this platform somehow became increasingly polarized, and
Nabiha, as a First Amendment attorney, it must give you a little bit discomfort to see anything being banned, particularly a news institution.
Yeah, I mean, I consider this like a lifelong intellectual problem, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not as if this is the first time that there's a stream of content that we've said, this is too much. If you think less than 10 years ago, there was a decision, and I would say on many of these platforms, you don't see content from ISIS or Al-Qaeda or a variety of other movements that exist. So the decision that something is too harmful, too persuasive, too biased to exist on a platform this isn't
Very
the first time we're making that decision. We make it all the time. And so I think what it involves, and this is the reason it's like a lifelong philosophical question, is what is the harm here? And I think the harm has to take into account the amplification capabilities. When you're talking about state-sponsored media, right? You can ban the networks, but what we saw Russia do right away was an extremely effective influencer campaign where they found 180 Russian influencers and said, here's a dance you're going to make that indicates pro-Russia support. Here's a hashtag Russian Lives Matters that you're going to get out there. Here's a song you're going to sing that says, strong, beautiful women in Russia embrace this movement. And you still get the message out. Right? And so you have to zoom out and look holistically. Are there other ways for the message to be distributed on the platform? Looking only at news company this or news company that isn't the whole message. And I think that's where I feel a little bit more comfortable with saying, this is effectively a propaganda stream, and we're going to de-emphasize it. And you could imagine de-amplification as a solution instead of banning. And that's something that I think platforms should explore.
Yeah, people often forget it's not just leave up, take down.
Exactly. There's a lot of levers to pull.
Exactly. Next question. Here we go. Okay.
Hey, I'm Matt Coolidge, formerly of the Civil Media Company.
Oh! A celebrity in the room.
So, question for this group. For the overwhelming landscape that is information consumption and often manipulation right now, we talk a lot about what's going wrong and where there are problems and challenges. Who's doing the best job right now? And I'm being purposely ambiguous. It could be social media companies. It could be journalism outlets, the influencer gray space that exists in between. Who's doing the best job promoting unified standards that are going to drive and restore trust in reliable information?
Love that question.
Oh, God, it's a hard question.
So
Salvatore's got an answer.
Yeah, I would say that I really like talking about other type of platform, like decentralized platform, like, for example, the Fediverse and Mastodon. This kind of platform creates instances where you can join one or the other instance, and you can choose somehow to follow some collectively decided rules. And this is a completely different paradigm from what we see now, where states are somehow deciding a point of view to take all over the media and the social media. So my suggestion here is we can also think about a new form of platform where the decision are not taken bottom up. But bottom down, but bottom up. So I think this could be also for the place we are in an interesting point.
I'll divide the answer into the best and the most fascinating or the most creative. I think the best, aside from the markup, obviously, I do think that there's a group of sort of forensic researchers, like you named Bellingcat. There's a variety of researchers that are really doing quite an honest job of saying, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we think is happening. And I think that's really important, and they're often the first source of information that you see news organizations then picking up and repeating, regurgitating, repackaging for sort of a mass way. But I think that intellectual honesty of, here's what we know right now, this is not an authoritative take because everything is unfolding in real time, is something that we haven't seen traditionally, right? Like news organizations in particular, certainly state-sponsored ones, will offer you an authoritative view. This is the truth. I think the truth is that none of us know what's going on ever. And so saying this is what our research allows us to conclude in this moment is humility we need in this space. And you see it with these researchers sort of first and foremost. On that same theme, what I think is the most creative, and I think you referenced some of the sort of like Mastodon and decentralized spaces, is I think thinking about community standards for moderation, right? How do smaller scope groups of people decide these are the norms we want, these are the norms we don't want for speech? I think that's very promising. And you saw it in the early days with a place like Reddit, which I actually think for community moderation offers a lot of interesting takeaways, not a model to replicate, just interesting insights. You see it with Wikipedia. And I think one of the interesting aspects of Web3 is thinking about how smaller organizations, how DAOs might set up their own rules of what is good, what is to be permitted, what isn't. And also thinking about interoperability between platforms as a way of, well, if I don't like that one, let me pick up and move somewhere else where I do like the rules. That's fascinating. It's creative. It does lead to this sort of splintered internet that Sal references. And that's, you know, what's best is subjective, and groups will decide that for themselves.
Thank you for bringing the Web3 element into this conversation on behalf of Polkadot and Unfinished. I just also want to say, I would be remiss at not also, when we talk about who's doing it best, have a shout out to the incredibly brave Ukrainian journalists on the ground, foreign journalists on the ground in Ukraine, and the Russian journalists who can no longer do the job. Many of them have had to flee their country or do undercover reporting in Russia. Let's not forget about the Russians.
Absolutely.
We have time for one more question, and it'll have to be a short question and a short answer. And if there's nobody, then I'm going to take moderator's prerogative. Really? Really, folks? Oh, there we go.
Richard Baum from Reuters. What does misinformation on Twitter look like if Elon Musk closes his deal?
It flourishes. Flourishing. I think we'll see a lot of it. Although what I will say about Twitter is that they do have a public API, so at least we'll know about what it looks like, which is more than you can say about most platforms.
Yeah, in fact, like for transparency, Twitter is one of the best platform that we can study. So it will be interesting to say to see the effect of these new policies that probably will be in place on Twitter. We still don't know, but then we will have effective instruments to measure the impact. And this is not something we can do, for example, on TikTok.
If those APIs don't change and if the deal ever closes.
I was like, I don't think he's going to buy it. I'll take that bet.
All right. Well, that's a great place for us to wrap up. Salvatore, Nabiha, thank you so much. And thank you so much for your great questions.